I know that we can choose to use that gift to benefit only myself, or I can use that gift to benefit others. Build the kingdom. Hey everyone, welcome to lesson 5 on our gifted course, and we're going to talk about stewardship. I want to read 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 1. Paul said, "Let a man so consider us as servants of Christ and stewards." Stewards of what? We're going to find out in a moment what he's a steward of, but let's talk about this word. This is not a word that we use very much in our society today, so let's get the dictionary and the Greek definition. The dictionary defines the word steward as the careful and responsible management of something entrusted to one's care. The Greek dictionary, I'm not going to even try to pronounce this Greek word, but you'll see it on your screen. One who has the authority and responsibility for something. One who is in charge of. One who is responsible for. Administrator or manager. Manager is a good word. So there are 3 clear aspects of a steward. Number 1, oversees what belongs to another. So I am responsible for what somebody else owns. Number 2, carries authority to manage what he has been entrusted. And number 3, is responsible. He or she will give an account to the owner. So obviously there's not a direct supervision from the owner, a micromanager, so to speak, but you are entrusted and you are expected to carry it out the way the owner desires to. All right, what would be an example? A financial planner. At our ministry, we have a small fund in which, each employee, we're taking care of them for their retirement. We have a financial manager who manages the investments for these funds that we give to our full-time employees. I, as an employee of Messenger International, I hardly ever go to that financial manager and say, well, which stock account are you investing in, or what annuity, or what government fund? I really don't care about it. I know he's got 40 years of experience, and I trust him with it. So if you look at the Bible, you've got Joseph in the Bible. Joseph started out as a slave, a household slave. But Potiphar saw that he was a very wise man. The wisdom of God was on his life. And Potiphar made him manager over his entire household. And the Bible says Potiphar didn't know anything that was going on in his house except other than what he would eat and his time to sleep. So Joseph, he trusted him. He made him a steward. And he handled what belonged to Potiphar in a way that he knew would be beneficial for Potiphar. So let's now talk about what Paul is specifically speaking about when he says, let a man consider us as servants of Christ and stewards. Let's finish the verse. Let a man so consider us as servants of Christ and stewards, now watch this, of the mysteries of God. So he said, I steward the mysteries of God. Now, what was this? Paul was given a gift of revelation, the revealing of the grace of God, the revealing of Jesus as the Messiah, and he stewarded it to bring to the Gentiles. He was responsible. So I want you to think about him stewarding this gift like Joseph stewarded Potiphar's belongings, like a financial planner would steward the finances of somebody without them micromanaging it. So this is the thing. God has given you a gift and he says, you're a steward of my ability. That's basically what Paul is saying. I am a steward of God's gifts. So how does this apply to us? I'm going to make it clear. Listen to what Peter says in 1 Peter 4:10. As each one has received a gift, that's the Greek word charisma, minister it to one another. So administrate it. Give it out as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. So here's the thing. I know that we can choose to use that gift to benefit only myself, or I can use that gift to benefit others. Build the kingdom. We're a steward. We choose. We're going to give an account of how we did it. So here's the key point. You have a gift or gifts. And these gifts are specific endowments of grace that empower you with special abilities, just as the Apostle Paul. We are stewards of those gifts. To show the importance of your gifts and stewarding them well, let's use Paul's attitude as a template. So let's look at specifically how he viewed his stewardship. He says in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 16 and 17, "If I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast of, for necessity is laid upon me. Yes, woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. For if I do this willingly, I have a reward. But if against my will, I have been entrusted with a stewardship." There's a lot here, okay? First of all, he says, necessity is laid upon me. When God gives you one of His gifts, two of His gifts, three of His gifts, whatever it is, it's His ability. And there is a necessity that is laid upon us to steward that gift well to build the kingdom. And we're actually going to give an account how we handled that. But notice Paul says, woe is me if I don't use that gift correctly, if I don't preach the gospel. Now, this word woe is very interesting. It is a Greek word that means this. One dictionary defines it as disaster, horror. Another dictionary defines it, and these are Greek dictionaries, as interjection of grief and indignation. Each occurrence of this word in the New Testament implies a very serious, terrifying judgment. Okay? I know, I might be scaring you right now. I'm not trying to, but I am saying I would like to see a healthy fear of God in us. Today we so emphasize that we are children of God. Sometimes we overemphasize it to the neglect of what we're called to do. See, remember Ephesians 2, 8, 9, and 10. You are saved by grace to be a child of God, but you're equally empowered by that same grace to do something. You got to get it in your psyche, in your paradigm. Just as much as you are called to be a child of God, equally as much you are called to do something. And that doing something, you are responsible for the obedience to it. In other words, if you neglect, let me give you an example. I believe Whitney Houston, I believe she was called to lead millions into the presence of God. She had a voice that was ethereal. I mean, I shivered when that woman sang. There was a supernatural ability on her to lead people. But the question is, did she use it to build the kingdom, or did she use it for other purposes? I'm not here to judge Whitney. I'm not her judge. But I am saying, what will be the story of how she used her gift at the judgment seat? And maybe I'll talk more about that in the next lesson. So this is the thing we've got to understand. God doesn't micromanage us. He gives us this gift and says, now it's up to you to find out my heart's desire and how to use this gift. There is a seeking involved, and this is something we're going to talk about in a future lesson. With my own personal example, I look at when God spoke to me, I will never forget. I can close my eyes and see where I was. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning. Lisa and I had a pretty old car at the time. I could close my eyes and I could see that car. I was walking around in a circle near that car in a remote place, and God said to me, "Son, I want you to write." And I think about just taking that so lightly and thinking, God, you've got the wrong person. I can't write. I can't do this. And I remember what those women said to me 10 months later. They said, "John Bevere, if you don't write what God is giving you to write, He'll give the messages to somebody else, and one day you'll give an account for it." Now I think, what if I wouldn't have written? What if I would have left that gift dormant? Beta Satan would have been given to somebody else. I look at Beta Satan, it's in over 100 languages now. It's pushing 2 million copies. I've had so many people write to our ministry saying that it literally freed them from offense and unforgiveness and bitterness and resentment. What if I didn't write? I mean, if you would have looked at me when I was 25 years old and said, the way God is going to send you to the nations of the world is through writing, I would have laughed you out of the room. But yet when God spoke to me, He released and imparted a gift. And what if I wouldn't have done that? And this is why it is so important. And I will talk more about this in lessons 7 and 8. This is why it's so important that we seek God, that we seek Him diligently in faith. Because when we seek Him, He reveals these things to us, all right? Let's revert back to Paul for a moment here, okay? Paul was well aware of the fact that God had entrusted something of great value to him. If he didn't administer it properly, then others would not experience the benefit and even suffer the loss of what God intended those others to receive. So he knew the gift wasn't given for him. That gift was given to others through him. The same is true for you and me. God did not place the gifts on your life for you. My ability to speak, my ability to write isn't for me. It's for you. And when you really understand that, it puts a holy fear in you rather than you thinking, oh, I can speak really well. Look at how good I can speak. You're not going down that path. You realize, whoa. This is really important that I steward this gifting well, because this gifting isn't for me, it's for others. And others will either benefit or others will have a deficit if I'm not faithful to it. I mean, this is why Paul said this. He said, if I do this willingly, I've got a reward. But you see, he said, if against my will, in other words, if I got bad attitude, I better still do it because I've been entrusted with this stewardship. You know, I look at writing. Writing was a labor for me before I was gifted, but after it now, you know, I'll start writing in the morning and it's in the afternoon and I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to do other things. But it's a joy for me to do. But I do it willingly. Because when I'm writing, I think about you. I'm not writing that thinking, gosh, I want an international bestseller. I want this book to go out all over. That's not my thought. My thought is, Lord, you're going to change people's lives through this. This is what you've put on my life for all these other people. For the people in Iran, for the people in China, for the people in Korea, for the people in Eastern Europe. And I could go on and on and on. I'm thinking in my heart. Now, let me tell you something. When I first started writing, it wasn't that way. I remember, you know, the first book that I wrote, you know, it took me a whole year to write that book. And we sent it to the publisher. And two publishers, and both publishers rejected it. So it took me a year to write it. I sent it to two publishers. One doesn't even respond. The other one says, we only do big names and we don't like this book and all that. Whatever. They told me why they didn't like it. And so I just self-published it. And I'd go to churches of 80 people, 100 people, and I would just sell it. And people would get the message and it would impact their life deeply. But I just did it because I knew it was what I was called to do. And I'm like, God, if you just want 80, 100 people reading it, then that's the way it's going to be. I felt in my heart the books were supposed to go further, but so then I wrote the second book. And I remember when I wrote the second book, my Bible school teacher wrote it and sharply criticized it, my former Bible school teacher. And I remember somebody else made a comment about one of those first two books. It was a friend of mine said, oh, John, you use too many scriptures. And I remember one night just laying on the floor, looking up at the ceiling, staring for like 30 minutes, thinking, I've wasted so much time. I've lost so much time. I mean, these are the thoughts that were bombarding my mind. I'm like, I'm a failure. No publisher wants my book. Nobody's interested in it. But I thought to myself, did I obey God? Yes. Is it a gift He put on my life? Yes. Is it helping people? Yes. Okay, just keep going. And I remember when we got to the third book, a friend of mine asked me to lunch one day, and I'll never forget this as long as I live. I go to lunch, and there sitting at the table is a man I'd never met. And he was the publisher of one of the publishing houses. He was now the leader of one of the publishing houses that rejected my first manuscript. And we're talking 3 years later. And he said, hey, John, what have you been speaking on when you speak out in churches? And I started sharing about offenses. And I remember him looking at me and he said, you know, we could never publish your book. You know that. right? We could never publish your book. And I said, well, yeah, I'm not trying to get you to publish a book. You asked me what I'm speaking. He went, oh, he caught himself. He went, oh, yeah. And I kept sharing about the message of offense. And he looked at me like 15 minutes later in the lunch and he said, John, can you get me a manuscript? I said, for what? He said, I want to publish this. I thought you just said you couldn't publish it. He said, no. This has to get into the earth. And I remember he published the book and it hardly sold at all. But then I went on one international talk show on January 18th, 1995. And I remember I was only supposed to talk 20 minutes. The publisher had got me the appointment. And I just thought, okay, I'll go on. They wanted mostly to talk about my wife and kids, and it was about a 20-minute segment on this interview, and they said, you can mention the book, it's a start. I said, great. So I go on the program, and I will never forget this. The interviewers held up the beta Satan and said, what is the beta Satan? And I opened my mouth, and for the next 40 minutes, I spoke on this subject. The anointing of God filled the whole studio. The floor directors never said, you're out of time. I went 40 minutes nonstop. The next day, every bookstore in America was sold out. And within a couple days later, they were 20,000 back ordered the publisher. It exploded. That was 4 years after God told me to write. I was viewing as being faithful and doing what God told me to do in writing that message, those messages. Even with the criticism, I just thought, God, I'm just going to obey you. There is obviously, you have put a gift on me to write. And now the books today are in the tens of millions in over 100 languages all over the world. It's so important that we are faithful stewards of the gift. And if we're faithful stewards of the gift, then God will cause it to grow as He sees fit. And remember, God never rewards as men reward. You may reach one person with the gift of God on your life that draws that person into the kingdom or benefits somebody's life that they may affect millions of people. And one day when you stand before Jesus, you will be rewarded greatly as He shows you all the souls you have impacted. And you'll say, I never saw all those people. Oh yeah, you affected that one with the gift I gave you, and that one person affected millions. You have no idea what the grand plan is, the grand scheme of things that God has orchestrated. But I will guarantee you, He has called you to affect people with your gift. And if you are faithful to it, you will be rewarded handsomely. Well, just as administering the gift is not only a responsibility of a godly steward, but motivation is so important. And we're going to talk about motives and intentions in our